Good evening, everybody. My name is Jose Romero. I am one of the reference librarian slash program at West Orange Public Library. Today, I have the pleasure of introducing Jennifer Shakaitis. I'm better. I'm getting better. She is an assistant professor at the Rutgers Cooperative Extension. Today, we're going to talk about a real issue that has touched me recently, and I'm hoping to make after Jennifer's talk some modifications in my diet. But I am so glad to have Jennifer here, and I leave the floor to her.
Thank you, Jose. I appreciate the introduction, and good evening, everybody. Thank you for joining me. As Jose said, my name is Jen Shakaitis, and I'm with Rutgers Cooperative Extension. And actually, speaking of that, before we get into our topic for tonight, I wanted to just take a couple of minutes to talk to you about Cooperative Extension, so you know who we are, what we do, where I'm coming from. So Cooperative Extension actually is a national system. There's a Cooperative Extension in every state. It's run out of the land-grant university in that state. So in New Jersey, land-grant university happens to be Rutgers. We've been around for a little over 100 years. And so when we were established, I guess, there's a group of very smart people that got together and realized that, there was all this great stuff happening at universities around the country. And there really should be a way for all of the research and information and resources to be available to the general public. And so Cooperative Extension was established to be like that bridge between the university and the community. Okay, people like myself are charged with ensuring that there's a evidence-based, research-based information that can reliably make its way into the community. Within Cooperative Extension, there are three main departments. You should see them on your screen there under the red writing. So in the black, you'll see the first one there. It says Agriculture and Natural Resources. So Agriculture and Natural Resources, or A&R, they work with the farming community, but also with home gardeners. So if you are having a problem with your garden at home, you can call them up. They run the program called Master Gardeners. Some of you may have heard of the Master Gardeners program. Wonderful program that helps home gardeners ensure that they are growing a healthy and prolific garden. The second department within Cooperative Extension is 4-H. That's the Youth Development Department. I'm sure most, if not everybody here, has heard of 4-H. They as I mentioned, that's the Youth Development Department. They're also the ones that run the county fairs every year. If you've ever been to one of those wonderful county fairs, they're great events. They didn't happen in 2020, but they did happen in 2021, at least some of them to some extent. So maybe some of you got to attend one of those. And finally, there is my department, which is Family and Community Health Sciences. And my department provides education and programming in the areas of health, nutrition, and wellness. So the great thing about working with Cooperative Extension is that you can feel confident that you are getting evidence-based, research-based, reliable information and programming. And we are provided, we're a county-based system. So in New Jersey, there's 21 counties. There are 21 Cooperative Extension offices. We have faculty and staff from all three departments in almost all 21 counties. We have a few vacant areas, but we are there to serve the community. We're provided by Rutgers to be a service to the community. So the programming that we offer is generally no charge. Sometimes there's a nominal fee depending on the type of service or program that you're accessing. So I think I covered everything. That's just a little bit about Cooperative Extension. Wanted you all to know where I was coming from and what we do. And if you have any questions about this or anything else that I present tonight, I'm going to leave time at the end for questions and answers. So, all right, we can get started now. So first of all, now we're going to talk about sodium in the diet today. So let's start with the very basics. And what is sodium? Okay. Sodium is a mineral. It occurs naturally in many foods. Okay. Sodium may also be added during manufacturing. Okay, it doesn't occur naturally in all foods, but in some. But then, of course, it can also be added during manufacturing, processing of many foods as well. Okay. Our bodies do need some sodium. Okay, it's necessary mineral for our bodies to stay healthy. It supports our nerves, our blood, and our muscles, helps them to function properly. Too much sodium obviously can have negative health effects. I mentioned before that sodium occurs naturally in many foods. So just to list a few of those in case you're curious. So we can find it in meats, shellfish, dairy products, grains, and vegetables, which some people are surprised by that. But yes, it does occur naturally, even in some vegetables. Fruits also, but in very small amounts. Okay, even drinking water has some sodium. Amounts can vary depending on the source, but you can also sometimes find sodium in your drinking water. So yeah, we need sodium in order to stay healthy. One thing I just want to clarify is that sodium and salt are not the exact same thing. Salt is about 40% sodium. Okay, so the main source of sodium in our diet tends to be from added salt. It is 40% sodium, but they're not one and the same. So I hope that makes sense. But salt is made of about 40% sodium. Okay, so as I said, it's a necessary mineral for our bodies to stay healthy. It supports a lot of our bodily functions. But of course, the reason that we're here today is because too much sodium can also have negative health effects. So we are going to talk about how much sodium we should eat and how much we do actually eat right now. The American Heart Association, their recommendation is to consume no more than 2,300 milligrams of sodium per day. Now, right now, they're reviewing those recommendations, and there seems to be a push now, or maybe it's coming down the pike, that the recommendation may change to 1,500 milligrams. Okay, it is 1,500 milligrams for certain people who have certain health issues or considered high risk for heart disease based on any number of factors. Okay. Right now, currently, on average, the average American consumes more than 3,400 milligrams of sodium each day. Okay, so if you're looking at the current recommendation of 2,300 milligrams, and then what the potential ideal recommendation may be at some point of 1,500, that could be like twice the recommended amount of sodium per day. Right. Cutting back by just 100 milligrams of sodium a day can significantly improve blood pressure and heart health. That's what studies show. Just cutting back by 1,000 milligrams a day can have a significant impact on our health. Okay. Studies also show that most of us are likely underestimating the amount of sodium that we eat. And that's likely because we're eating foods that we're not aware tend to contain as much sodium as they actually do. And I'll talk about that a little more in a minute. So to continue on about this, so sodium is listed on the nutrition facts label in milligrams, or mg. That's the abbreviation for it. So the nutrition facts label is the black and white label that's on the back of like packaged foods. Okay, it lists the calories, the fat, the serving size, all that. So on that nutrition facts label, it's listed in milligrams. Okay, so what does that mean? A milligram might not mean very much to many people. So I wanted to just kind of give you some reference points so you can understand what that might mean. So consider the amount of sodium in these salt quantities. Okay, in a quarter teaspoon of salt. Now remember, salt is about 40% sodium. Okay, so in a quarter teaspoon of salt, there's 575 milligrams of sodium. Half a teaspoon of salt, 1,150. 3/4 a teaspoon of salt, 1,725, and 1 teaspoon of salt is 2,300 milligrams of sodium. Does anybody, pop quiz, and you can unmute yourselves or raise your hand or put it in the chat, who remembers what the current recommendation from the American Heart Association is for how many milligrams of sodium we should be eating per day? Anybody want to be brave and throw out? This is from the previous slide. We just said it. So pop quiz here. I see some brave soul put it in the chat, 2,300 milligrams. That's right. That was from Cherokee. Thank you. So yeah, so 2,300 milligrams of sodium is 1 teaspoon of salt. Okay. So when I mentioned before that reducing your sodium intake by 1,000 milligrams a day can have a significant impact, you can see why. That's like just about, a little less than half a teaspoon of salt. Okay. Cherokee, you're celebrating. Congratulations, you win. I'm sorry, I don't have a prize to give out, especially since we're virtual, but next time, maybe I'll remember to, I should bring prizes with me when we're starting to do things in person again. So yeah, a little less than half a teaspoon of salt. So cutting just half a teaspoon of salt out of your diet per day can have a significant impact on your health. My slides are not advanced. There we go. Okay. All right, so some more facts on sodium. So as it stands, the average American takes in more than 3,400 milligrams of sodium each day. So that's, again, almost 2,000 milligrams more than that lower recommendation, the 1,500 that the American Heart Association recommends for ideal cardiovascular health. So that much sodium can have effects on your health. So studies link excess sodium intake to the development of elevated blood pressure, also known as hypertension. Hypertension, in turn, increases the risk of heart attacks, stroke, and also kidney disease. Okay. This is an issue that doesn't only affect adults. I think we tend to think of, heart-related health as being something that adults only need to focus on. But of children ages 1 to 18, 93% consume too much sodium. Okay, so that puts them at risk of developing heart disease and elevated pressure at an earlier age, even if not, right then when they're young. Even developing those habits of consuming that much sodium every day can put them at risk later in life. Again, why focus on sodium? It can have a direct impact on our health. There is a well-established body of evidence that links sodium and high blood pressure. I'll say this ad nauseum, but most Americans do eat more sodium than is recommended. Okay. The blood pressure response to sodium reduction is direct and progressive, but non-linear. That is, blood pressure response to changes in sodium intake is greater at sodium intakes below 2,300 milligrams than above this level. Okay. So 9 in 10 Americans eat more sodium than is recommended for a healthy diet. Sodium is everywhere. Okay, found in many unsuspecting foods at levels that are often higher than is recommended and unnecessary. Okay. Consuming too much sodium in the foods we eat strongly linked to the development of worsening high blood pressure, bringing with it increased risk of kidney disease, stroke, and other heart disease. Okay. Currently, 1/3 of American adults have high blood pressure or hypertension. And this is a number that still, every time I give this talk, still kind of shocks me. About 90% of American adults are expected to develop high blood pressure at some point in their lifetimes. Okay, whether that's a year from now, 10 years from now, 30 years from now, 90% of American adults are expected to develop high blood pressure in their lifetimes. And that is due at least in part to just the fact that we are eating so much more sodium than is recommended. Okay. Okay. More about why we should focus on sodium. I mean, sometimes it all just, does come down to the numbers, but if Americans reduce sodium intake to 1,500 milligrams a day, this could result in an estimated $26.2 billion in healthcare savings and improve the quality of life substantially. Okay. A national effort that reduces sodium intake by 1,200 milligrams a day, so that's like, about half a teaspoon, could reduce healthcare costs by up to $24 billion per year. Okay, so consider that fact. If all adults in this country reduce their sodium intake by half a teaspoon a day, the impact that could have. When it comes to health disparities, which unfortunately do exist, the prevalence of high blood pressure in African American adults in the US is 40%, which is among the highest in the world. Okay. African Americans have almost twice the risk of first ever stroke compared to white adults. Hispanics are at an increased risk of hypertension and stroke. Sodium intake is significantly higher in Hispanic infants and toddlers as well. This is what studies show. So that is one reason why they tend to be at higher risk later in life as well. So that also means that sodium reduction has tremendous potential to reduce racial disparities in blood pressure related cardiovascular disease as well. So for middle age and older age adults and for African Americans, there is strong scientific evidence that these groups are especially sensitive to the blood pressure lowering effects of sodium reduction going from 2,300 milligrams a day to 1,500 milligrams a day. And this is why the American Heart Association is starting to move towards that lower recommendation, because of just the really significant effects, positive effect that it can have on the health of thousands or even millions of people.
Jennifer, can I ask you a question?
Sure.
What is it among white Caucasians? If it's not 40%, what's their number in terms of getting it during their adulthood? You said 40% for Hispanics and Blacks, but what is it for white Caucasians? Do you know the number?
Off the top of my head, I don't remember. But that is an excellent question, and I should put that number in here. And I'm going to make a note for myself. And Jose, can I email that to you?
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm glad you asked
you
that.
can.
Thank you. Okay, so again, more about why we should focus on sodium in our diet. So developing healthy habits in children's salt preferences, as many preferences for foods do, tend to develop early in life. Eating habits formed earlier in life often tend to continue into adulthood. And salt is something that, the more you have, the more you develop the expectation for foods to taste saltier. And so it's a habit, it's a preference that is formed. And then when things don't have as much salt as, maybe the things you're used to eating, they tend to not taste as good to you, because it doesn't taste how you feel like it should, like what you're used to tasting, if that makes sense. In the US, nearly 80% of 1 to 3-year-olds and more than 90% of 4 to 18-year-olds get too much sodium. Okay, a recent study found that many toddler foods have too much sodium. So toddler foods meaning like prepared foods, okay, or packaged foods that you buy. Okay. Kids who have high sodium diets are about 40% more likely to have elevated blood pressure as kids who have lower sodium diets. Okay. Current sodium consumption in the US more than 2 times higher than the recommended or that 1,500 limit that the American Heart Association is moving towards. Men tend to consume more, but also, men generally tend to eat more calories than women, because there's, differences in men's calorie needs versus women's calorie needs on average. And sodium intake is correlated with calorie intake. So I hope that makes sense. Okay, so overall average sodium intake is more than 3,400 milligrams a day for Americans 2 years and older. Okay, so that's just like showing you that graph, that differential there. So men may consume, like upwards of 4,000 milligrams per day. Women are hovering right around that 3,000. So the 3,400 is like that average number. And then that red line is where that 1,500 recommendation is. So it just kind of shows you how much more we're eating. So where does all this sodium come from? Okay, more than 75% of sodium consumed that we consume comes from processed foods. Okay, sodium is just about everywhere. It's found in, it's hard to not eat it almost, right? It's spread out in the food supply so much that even the top 10 sources of sodium make up less than half, around 44% of sodium intakes. Okay. So many people think that just cutting back on the salt shaker at the table is enough to reduce their sodium levels, but it may not be, depending on what else you're eating. Okay. Only 6% of the sodium that we consume comes from the salt shaker. So in other words, like if you're sitting down to eat a meal and you go to pour some salt on top of the, the potato that you're eating or something, that is not where we're getting the majority of our sodium from. So if you cut back on that, I'm not saying that's not a good thing to do, but it may not have the effect of reducing as much sodium from your diet as you think it might be. Okay. So we also need more sodium, lower sodium options when we're at the store, when we're out eating out, at restaurants, etc. So you can see there that this pie chart shows you that big red piece, 77% of the sodium that we eat comes from processed and restaurant foods. The problem when you're at a restaurant is that you don't know what they're putting in their food. And salt tastes good. I'll be the first to acknowledge that. Salt tastes good. We like the way it tastes. I like the way salt tastes. I often add salt to my food. And restaurants know this, and the food industry knows this. So they know that if they add more salt to things, we are going to like the way they taste more. And that's going to, potentially increase their sales, both restaurants and then prepared foods at supermarkets, et cetera. So the motivation is there to, to not reduce the sodium because people like the way it tastes. Okay, so more on that pie chart, you can see that naturally occurring sodium makes up about 12% of what we consume. Home cooking is about 5%. And then while eating, so that's that 6%, that's what we add, when we're sitting down to a meal and we add it ourselves from the salt shaker on the table. Okay, this is the Salty Six. The American Heart Association put together this infographic to kind of highlight some of the more common foods and where we tend to get a lot of our dietary sodium from. So breads and rolls. Unfortunately, I know who doesn't love bread, right? But breads and rolls do tend to be high in sodium. Pizza, of course, because pizza, obviously the crust is made of bread, which is one of the Salty Six. And then you have your cheese, which also tends to be high in sodium. And then there's often sodium, salt in the sauce that's on pizza, although that probably not as much as compared to the bread and the cheese. And then, of course, depending on what toppings you add, that could add lots more sodium as well, especially if you are using toppings such as, processed meats like sausage, pepperoni, all those delicious things that we like, but they tend to be very high in sodium. So pizza can, really be like a sodium bomb. I'm sorry to be the bearer of bad news. And sandwiches also. So there's the bread that's in the, there's the sodium that's in the bread. And then often you add cheese to sandwiches, right? There's sodium in the cheese. Lunch meats or cold cuts, those are preserved, tend to be very high in sodium as well. So that's, the three things right there that are going to be high in sodium. When you put them all together, it adds up. Okay, speaking of sandwiches, cold cuts and cured meats tend to be very high in sodium. Soup also. And other canned products as well, but soup in particular tends to be very high in sodium. There are low sodium varieties of soup. And just as an FYI, when you go shopping and you see a label on a can or a box, a packaged food that says low sodium, that actually has a specific meaning. The FDA regulates how food companies label their products. And so if a product says low sodium, that means that a serving of that food must contain 5% or lower of your recommended allowance for sodium per day. That can be a significant reduction from like the regular or non-low sodium varieties of food. So if you are looking to reduce sodium in your diet, that low sodium label can actually have a significant or make a significant difference in the amount of sodium that you're consuming. Okay.
Can you give an example, Jennifer? Let's say regular soup. How much sodium is in a regular Progresso? Would you say 4,000 milligrams?
I can grab a can right now if you'd like me to.
I would like to, yeah.
Give me 1 second. Bear with me for a minute.
All right.
All right, I have some here. A friend of mine was kind enough to drop off some soups to us when my family was sick several weeks ago. So I have lentil here. You know what? I can't see myself. Let me make sure. Can you guys see this?
Right.
Okay, this is lentil soup. The sodium for one serving. Now there are 2 servings in this can. So a serving size is 1 cup. So this is 2 cups in this can. So if I half this can, that would give me 740 milligrams of sodium, which is 32% for the day. So twice that would be set to 71% in this one can. So that's the lentil. The minestrone. Let's see, slightly lower. 1 serving is 30% of my sodium, 690 milligrams. So 2 servings, it says is 67%. Not sure how that works exactly. Oh, this must be slightly over 2 servings. That's why. Yeah. So the whole can is 67% of my sodium,
Wow.
1,500 milligrams. And then we have split pea. Okay, so this is about the same as the minestrone. So 680 milligrams in one serving, 1,500 in the whole can.
Whew.
Okay. So, but if you see that label that says low sodium, that will be significantly lower in sodium, not just like, oh, we took out, like
Yeah,
10 milligrams or something,
right,
has an actual meaning.
right.
Okay. All right, so I covered soup and then burritos and tacos. Again, I'm sorry, I'm just the messenger. But yeah, there tends to be a lot of salt in the meats that are in those burritos and tacos, and then also in the tortillas, and then potentially in any sauces that you add as well, and the cheese as well. So yeah, I'm not saying don't ever eat these things, right? I'm not saying that. I mean, I love bread and I enjoy pizza. I mean, I eat all these things as well. But if you're looking to cut out sodium, maybe if you eat pizza 4 times a week, maybe you can try it 2 or 3 times if sodium is a concern of yours and you're trying to figure out which foods to address.
Jennifer, may I ask a question, please?
Sure.
Okay, so natural organic vegetables that you would grow in your garden.
Mhm.
Let's say, okay, carrots or string beans or beets. Yeah. Okay, so they haven't been canned or anything. They come right out of the earth, whatever minerals are in the earth.
Yeah.
Where could we find that measurement?
Oh, okay. I mean, you can find it online. You can Google
You can?
nutrition facts, but honestly, that's not what you have to worry about. That, please eat your fresh vegetables. There's so many other nutrients in there that, are
Right.
beneficial for you. And again, remember, look at this. You don't see vegetables on here. This is not where we're getting our sodium from. Does that see what I mean? Even if you add some from the salt shaker, okay, celery has sodium in it. Doesn't mean I would never tell you don't eat celery for any reason, unless you don't like it, of course. Yeah. Okay. I mean, if you're looking to, really reduce the sodium in your diet and you're getting down to the vegetables, it may be time to consult with a dietitian if sodium is something that you're really that concerned about. Right. But first you should look for the other things. Look at, the restaurant foods that you're eating, the packaged foods, the canned soups, the pizzas, the lunch meats, the, sandwiches, etc. Okay.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay. Oh, this is just, if anybody was interested in like looking for a way to cut down on sodium. This is the sodium swap challenge, encourages you to be aware of your sodium intake. Take a 3-week challenge to swap lower sodium versions to 2 salty 6 items per week. So basically looking at these salty 6, I'm going to say fenders, the foods that tend to be higher in sodium, and looking for ways you can reduce the consumption and maybe replace them with lower sodium foods. And I'll be emailing, Jose, I hope it's okay if I email you some follow-up materials, and then you can email it out to everybody who registered for this. And then that way you have these, you don't have to, copy this down or anything or take notes. You'll have that
Sure, no
available
problem.
to you. Thank you. Okay. So during each of the 3 weeks of this, salty swap challenge, you pledge to swap out 2 of the salty 6 food items for lower sodium versions of the food. One of the messages in this challenge is that salt taste preferences can change over time, and we, encourages people to try lower sodium foods and experience that change for themselves. Okay. So that's the information that I have. I'm going to stop sharing my slides so I can see people now. There we go. And I'm happy to take questions, more questions if you have them.
Jennifer, what gets me is, everything here is canned or it's frozen.
Yeah.
You go to other countries and they eat for the day. You go out and work and you buy fresh, food and you come home and cook it. But I think it's, you know, I've really tried to cut my sodium intake, but I feel it's almost impossible.
I am not going to argue with that. Like I hope that one of the points that I made is that, or that came across, I should say, is that I understand that it's everywhere. It's ubiquitous. It's in so many foods that, and we are, tend to have busy lifestyles. We work full time. Maybe we have families, or, just other things that we want to do aside from spend our entire evenings cooking from scratch. Right. And I understand that. I don't want to spend all evening, every evening doing that either. If sodium is something that you're concerned about, that you want to cut out, there are ways to do that and make substitutions. But it takes some real conscientious effort to do that, because it's not, it may not be the things that you are used to eating, the things that, you tend to gravitate towards, or that you historically that you grab in the supermarket or at the store or at the, the restaurant on your way home or whatever it is. I know. So I guess,
Yeah.
you're right. It's hard. And I acknowledge that. And, but if heart health is something that you are hoping to, prioritize, then this can be a really, really great way to do that by cutting out, some sodium in your diet. And like I said before, it's even cutting out half a teaspoon. The milligrams, it sounds like a huge number, right? 1,100 milligrams, cutting it out, but it's really, it's half a teaspoon. So if you think of it that way, maybe you could say, all right, what's half a teaspoon? Maybe it's that, handful of chips that I tend to have at night. Maybe if I just cut that out, that could be, my 1,000 milligram reduction.
Right.
Sometimes it's a useful exercise. I don't like to get too much into the like nitty gritty, like calories and milligrams, because it can be tedious and turn you off and make you want to give up. But it can be a worthwhile exercise to try to figure out about how much sodium you are ingesting in a day. And then sometimes you can say, oh, you know what? I don't really need that extra slice of cheese on the sandwich. I can take one off, and that will reduce my sodium by this amount. Or maybe those chips at night, you know what, I can give those up. Maybe I'll,
Right.
have something else instead. So even those small changes can have a big effect.
Jennifer, what about, they always say, cut back on, putting salt into your cooking. So in other words, if you're boiling, pasta, or you're, cooking carrots or something, they always, if you follow the recipe books, they always tell you to put, a teaspoon of salt in, or whatever. I mean, how much impact does that really have?
I'm sorry, what was the last thing you said?
How much does that account for if you're putting it into the water that you're cooking, whatever you're cooking?
Yeah, well, keep in mind, most likely, whatever you're cooking, you're not going to be eating the entire pot of pasta for yourself, right? And some of it will get absorbed into the water, and it won't all get absorbed into the pasta, for example. So it's hard to say, it's hard to give you an exact number. Well, this percentage goes into the pasta, this percentage goes into the water. I mean, it's, it's not really determined. But again, I'm going to show you, remember, this is the slide that I showed you before. I'm going to go back to it. Bear with me. Home cooking accounts for how much of our sodium intake?
Oh, 5%.
Do you see that?
5%, right?
5%.
For home cooking. Wow.
I'm not saying don't make an effort to reduce your salt, your added salt, but again, if you are looking for the sources of food in your diet where you're getting all that sodium, look elsewhere first. Look at maybe what you're, grabbing from the fast food restaurant on the go, or if you're, going out to eat or something, or if you're, it's that packaged food, that convenience food, the pizza, the sandwiches.
I've gotten used to, cooking without salt. But when I cook for my family, they know that they don't add salt, because I don't even taste the difference anymore, because I'm so used to cooking without salt.
Yeah.
But people really do recognize and taste the difference. And,
sure. Yeah, and that's that, the tolerance that we build up to the saltiness, and the expectation that we have it's salty.
Right.
Yeah.
Jennifer, let me ask you, is there alternative to salt that you can use in cooking?
I mean, herbs and spices are a great alternative.
Okay.
You know, especially if you get them fresh. You know, sometimes if you get the dried, you know, in the can or the, you know, the shakers or whatever, they don't have that really robust flavor. But like, I mean, if I add lots of garlic to a dish, I don't really miss the salt, for example, you know.
Yeah.
Or, you know, if there's something is flavored with onions, I don't think necessarily that it tends to need a lot of salt. So it depends obviously on what the dish is. Can't add garlic and onions to every single thing. But experimenting with herbs and spices can kind of lead you to figure out, okay, well, I like the way this tastes and I don't miss the salt if I add, you know, maybe a lot of basil or, you know, extra oregano or load it up with garlic.
Right. Jennifer,
So-
I'm sorry.
Yeah, go ahead. Sorry, if I could just let you know, I did in the chat box, I put a link to an evaluation. So if you want to just click on it, it'll open up another window and you can either wait until we're done to fill it out. You can do it while I'm answering questions. But those evaluations go to Rutgers. They help us understand what audiences we're reaching and also helps me understand if I should make any changes to my programming. I absolutely read them and I value your feedback, and I have made changes to programming based on my feedback from audiences. So if you wouldn't mind taking 3 minutes, it's anonymous, to fill it out, I would appreciate it. Thank you. Okay, I'm sorry. So now back to your questions. I think Jose had one and Marge too.
Marge, you can go.
No, my question was, does, you know, an onion or garlic have sodium in it?
They might, but again, this is not where you have to be worried. Marge is so worried about her vegetables having sodium. Marge, don't worry about those things. Worry about your pizza. Worry about if you're ordering out tacos or getting fast food, or, you know, the vegetables are not what you really have to worry about, and the herbs and things like that. They may have some, but not to the point where it's going to, you know, increase your sodium levels by, you know, a huge percentage or anything.
Right.
It's not, listen, let me tell you this. If you are concerned about heart disease and you know that you need to reduce your sodium, you should work with a dietitian to figure out where in your diet maybe you're getting the sodium from. If your blood pressure is higher than you like, you know, work with your healthcare professional, because I don't know you, I don't know your health history, I don't know what you tend to eat in a day, so I can't tell you with 100% confidence, oh, well, this is what you should be eliminating, or this is where you should look for your sodium. It's a worthwhile exercise to kind of take a little inventory of what you're eating and read labels. You know, you might be shocked at some of the things that you're eating that you don't even think about, you know, are high in sodium.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I actually wound up in the hospital with not enough salt in my diet. So,
and you're worried about onions.
Because I went on such a strict
from your garden.
no sodium, that I went on such a strict diet that, you know, so it's never mind.
Jennifer, tell me about plant-based foods. I heard they're loaded with a lot of salt, but people are doing that now.
Plant-based, I mean, plant-based just means comes from a plant at some point.
Oh.
I mean, so if you're talking about like plant-based, like substitutes, like meats and stuff, is that what you're?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, that can be a highly processed food. I mean, just because it isn't made from meat doesn't necessarily mean that it's highly nutritious.
Oh.
It might, you know, it might have less like saturated fat, but every time, in general, when you take something out of a food, that food's going to lose flavor. I'll give you an example. The fat-free diet craze of like the 80s and 90s. I don't know, I'm old enough to remember that. I don't know if everybody here is, but you know, that was that you couldn't have no fat in your food. And that was when the Snackwell cookies came out and they were fat-free. So that meant you could eat the whole package, right?
Yeah.
When you take fat out of a food, it loses a lot of flavor. It doesn't taste very good. So what companies started doing was they started adding a lot of more sugar and a lot more salt. Okay, so they swapped it out so that it tasted better and maybe the texture was better, because those things also help with texture, especially sugar. But it doesn't mean that it's necessarily a highly nutritious food and you can eat the entire sleeve of Snackwell cookies just because they're fat free. So my point is just that just because something is made from a plant at some point doesn't necessarily mean that it is, you know, something you should eat 3 times a day or anything.
Right.
I hope that makes sense. Yeah.
No, it does.
Okay.
No, it does. And I think my biggest problem is I'm gonna have to stop going to every diner in New Jersey and stop eating because there's a lot of diners, and I love dining food. I do. And
Oh, who doesn't, right? I mean, of course, yeah. And that's why I keep saying, don't shoot the messenger. It's not.
Yeah.
I'm not saying that these foods aren't delicious and we don't want to eat them and that you wouldn't eat them sometimes, of course. I mean, it's impossible to avoid sodium 100%. You don't want it, and you need some sodium.
Right.
But, just taking a look and saying, all right, maybe, what can I reduce, or how can I cut out a little sodium in my diet? And sometimes, you find a way, and it's not as torturous as you may have thought.
Okay. Any questions? Anybody have any questions for Jennifer?
No, thank you, Jennifer. It's really, I'm gonna have to look into see, it's, I never really thought about, natural vegetables coming right out of the garden having sodium. So I'm gonna look into that, but
Watch those green beans. I'm kidding.
But even canned, if in the winter.
Canned is another story. Canned have added sodium. Sure, because that's part of the preservation process.
Yeah.
You can get low sodium. Again, that does mean something.
Right, I've seen that on cans. Yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Okay. Frozen is a good option. Frozen vegetables often don't have any added sodium. They might, they could, but you just check the label.
Oh, that's
It
good.
says salt, go for they're the ones that don't have the added salt.
Okay. Well, Jennifer, thank you.
You're very welcome.
Your time and effort tonight, and
My pleasure.
I thank the audience too for participating.
Thank you for your questions. I appreciate it. And you'll have my email address. I'll email you some things, and then you can always email me follow-up questions if you have any as well.
Exactly. And
Great.
I'd really like to see how we can do the program on sugar.
Sure. Yeah, let me know.
And
Oh, wow. Yes, that would be extremely helpful.
Yeah, it really would.
Happy to do that as well.
All right then. Well,
All right.
everybody, good night.
Good night. Thank you so much.
And,
Thanks, everyone. Take care.
Bye-bye now.
Bye-bye.